Hello, and welcome to a very important episode of the Family Futures podcast. I was joined by Clare Solomon's adoptive parent and now campaigner, and Stephen Mully, Therapy Services Manager for the Complex Trauma Service here at Family Futures. We are discussing the realities and the impact of the changes to the Adoption Special Guardianship Support Fund, or the ASGSF. This podcast is about raising awareness of the huge impact these changes will have and have already had, but also the effects they are going to have on not just the adoption, special guardianship and care community, but other services as well. Before we get into the discussion, I want to let listeners know there are a couple of things you can do to support the call for change. You can sign the petition and you can raise awareness or join the march on the 3rd of May. We do discuss this in more detail during the podcast, and I will leave all of the details in the show notes below.
So I'm Clare Solomons. I'm an adoptive mum to two wonderful girls. And what's brought me here, so we found ourselves as a family in crisis a number of years ago now, when our daughters were 4 years old, and they were kind of living. They've got developmental trauma and attachment difficulties. And they were living in a survival state, really, in a constant state of sort of fight, and freeze. Incredibly distressing for them. Led to a lot of violence at home, and real difficulties across all areas of their lives. So it really impacted their schooling and ultimately left them without a school, and without an education. And that's something that still years on, we're trying to sort out and get them back into education. So we found ourselves in that sort of crisis, and the ASGSF was a lifeline for us. It's been transformative. We were lucky enough to have our assessment at Family Futures, and it was the first time we felt seen and we felt heard and understood, and that there was going to be some help. And I honestly cannot tell you what that meant at the time, and still to this day. And we then, we managed to get what we needed was match funding because of the complexity of our daughter's needs and the amount of help that we needed. And we got that. And then we're able to start on a really fantastic package of therapy, the MPP model, neurophysiological psychotherapy, which works fantastically well. I won't go into that for now. But we've been having that for just over 2 years, and it has been transformative. So both that therapy model and the funding that we've needed to access that has transformed our lives and transformed our daughters' lives and got them into a much better place. And which isn't to say it's still without their complexities, which is why we still need the fun to carry on for us, but they are now much more emotionally regulated. They're not living in a constant survival state. They are accessing an alternative provision 4 times a week, and and are probably on the precipice of getting back into a school, hopefully. And if you think of that longer term, that's going to mean they're going to be happier children that can fulfill their potential, become adults that contribute to society. So the putting in the funding now also, apart from being morally and ethically right, saves us a lot of money down the line. Anyway, so that's how we've needed to use it. These changes that have been announced are pretty devastating for us as a family, because any of these sort of dyadic developmental psychotherapy or MPP, all of these models are long-term by design, and they need a long-term commitment, and they really work. But with this fund, all of the uncertainty, not knowing what's going to go year on year, it has really damaging effects. So we don't know what will happen with funding for us. And so that drove me sitting on my sofa. So I'm talking a lot now. But yeah, from sitting on my sofa when the announcement came out and thinking, enough's enough, we need to take some action. So I promptly set up a Facebook page and a protest march. And it's kind of snowballed since then.
It has.
Yeah. We've now got a petition that's about to hit 8,000 signatures. And hopefully that will just keep growing. And we've got a march planned for the 3rd of May at 1 o'clock to Downing Street to deliver that petition. And we're kind of calling for 3 things, if you like. We're calling on the government to make an immediate reversal of the changes that they've made to the ASGSF. Once they've done that, to hold a sector-wide consultation over the next 12 months, because they made these changes without consultation with anyone. And then lastly, any future changes that they intend to make, we would like to be on hold until appropriate planning and provision and resourcing are in place that mean we don't get the damaging effects that we've got with this sudden announcement that no one was prepared for, and we're all scrabbling around, and families are desperate out there, and amazing providers like yourselves that have committed so much to our community to help these traumatised children and families. So many of them we're hearing from risk not having a viable business anymore. And these are community interest companies, they're not for profit. So they're not doing this for any other reason than to help our families. But if it's not financially viable for them and they leave the space, that's hugely damaging as well. And what fills that space is also a worry. But I'm going to stop there because I've talked a lot.
Thank you, Claire. Stephen?
Yeah, there's so much in all that you just covered, Claire. I think I was just thinking, kids like yours and the kids we work with at Family Futures, these are children and young people who have experienced significant abuse, neglect, violence in their crucial years of development. And their needs are deeply complicated, sort of cover all areas and all aspects of their lives, don't they? And there isn't a quick fix for these kids. The children and young people we see coming through the doors at Family Futures, it's long-term work, like you say, and it's often intensive work that's needed. And yeah, certainly the MPP model is one of a number of models that are used out there, and there's various organisations out there that are doing this really crucial work. And the MPP model has got the research and the evidence base behind it to show the effectiveness of it, but also to show that the long-term work is what's needed, and the intense work is what's needed because of the depth of, I don't know, the depth of the damage that's being done. This is the clear in the title, it's developmental trauma. So it's at the centre of their very development. And these are children and young people who are going to have various needs and struggles throughout their lives quite often, to a greater or lesser extent. So I think, yeah, that's where my thoughts went whilst you were talking. And the ASGSF has historically allowed for that early intervention because we know all the research and all the evidence shows that early intervention is what's needed. And you very briefly touched on the long-term impact of this work, but also the long-term impact of this work not happening. And that with early intervention, it's sort of putting in funding and putting in therapy and putting in the work now to save all sorts of difficulties further down the line. So I think these changes to the ASGSF, like you say, there was no consultation. It's deeply frustrating, and it's terribly short-sighted, because I think what's really frightening for me is that the damage that can be done in the space of a year with these children and young people is huge. And the impact of all of this could set these kids back years and years and years. And I think that's what scares me about it, is that, you know, in this 1 year where, you know, there may be consultations and all sorts of things, but the damage that could be done or is likely to be done to these kids and families is going to be devastating.
Yeah. And I think you can't sort of overstate that, because it really is. And the stress, you know, these children and families are already living with high levels of stress. And this could really, really do the stress of not knowing, will help be there? Will the fund be there? And that was already pretty stressful. Year on year, you have to go through an application process, and it's not an easy one, which is important for people to know. Actually, very robust application process. It's not easy to get funding for therapy. There clearly has to be a proof of need. But yeah, you still already do that year to year. Will I get funding next year? And so that's stressful to a degree every year anyway. And this just adds so much for families that desperately need the help, and they need the hope. And yeah, we had a parent contact us yesterday that said they've been fighting for help for 4 years. There was finally a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's been extinguished. And yeah, that's just not right.
No. And I think the story we often hear is, you know, these kids do tend to need specialist support and specialist input from wherever that comes from. You know, and the ASGSF was making sure that they were getting specialist input, and the input and the interventions that they needed for the complexities of their needs. Yeah.
I think...
Yeah. Sorry. You go, Charlotte.
Yes, okay. I was just going to say, I think what we see as well is how damaging the wrong input, or not the... I mean, expensive also. So if they fund the wrong thing, and then we go back to the specialist assessment. So if you have a specialist assessment using the funding and then have to wait for the next year's funding, your needs are going to change because you've had to wait. So it's going to be a different package, or a more extensive package. And you might have had interventions. We see quite a lot of families who come to us who've had multiple interventions that haven't worked. And not only is that obviously expensive for the government funds that have funded those interventions that haven't quite been enough or have not been right, it's also the how draining on the families to go and try something else and try this, try that, and then having to come back and, is this going to work? And you just...
I think that really, really speaks to one of the counter arguments that is coming up, is that this change is meant to allow a greater number of families to access the support. And obviously we want that, but that means more funds need to go in, not that we cut what is there for the people using it, because breadth is not better than depth. And I think that's what you're saying. There's no point giving everybody less if it's insufficient to meet need, and you just have an intervention where the money is potentially wasted. Or we strip the sector of specialists, and it is a specialist area. You guys are very highly trained professionals and experts in your field, and it's not easy to get those qualifications. and we need that level of specialism. And if you take potentially those providers away, who comes in and says, I'll do this for £3,000? We don't know. And that worries me.
Because I guess it makes me think as well, one of the other counter arguments around this is that actually the ASGSF, over its existence as a whole, has never been increased with inflation. So in fact, if you take inflation into account, the amount in the pot has been steadily going down anyway. And then you're right, spreading it thinly to more people is not the answer, and actually is just unhelpful.
And it's not safe.
It's not safe, no.
It's
well,
not
I think,
safe.
And I sort of was wondering whether to say that, because changes like this, I really believe, sadly, it will mean that families break down, that kids go back into care at great cost to the state, but also at great cost to their mental health, families' mental health. We'll see rates of mental health difficulties going up hugely in this demographic. And children and young people might even lose their lives. And I think that's the seriousness of it. I think, we can talk about all the money side of things, but really that's what it's about, is that families and children are going to be broken apart. And
and that's just, it is, I think, sadly, or maybe not sadly, but we have to have that financial discussion, because I think we'll need to have that to get the Treasury and the government to listen. But the Potato Group, as an example, which are a adoptive parent group, they're going to publish some research. But I think roughly 1 in 4 families, they're going to say, may end up with children needing to re-enter the care system or require parenting at a distance. And the cost of that, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds every year for each one of those children. That's the money cost. But as you've just said, Stephen, the moral cost of that is so much greater. These are real people, real children who deserve the best chance at a happy life. And they've already had traumatic starts. They're really vulnerable. And these changes deny them that chance of reaching their potential, and the ripple effect around them to their family and everyone else around them and to society. The issues that do come up in schools, the criminal justice system, etc., the list goes on and on. So we're saying fund it now or we will pay later.
Absolutely.
And this doesn't exist in isolation, like you're saying. This has a ripple effect on all other services, because if the specialist services go and can't support these young people, these children and the families, they will be relying on other services who don't have the capacity already. All of our services are stretched. But a huge ripple effect. It already is.
I think, since the announcement, sadly, we're already hearing about redundancies in the sector. We're already hearing about providers stepping back and moving away from the sector because now there just isn't the funding to support people, to support workers in the sector. Specialist, experienced, skilled clinicians are moving away from the sector already, and it's been a matter of days. So if things continue like that this year, by the end of this year, there may not be much of a sector left for these kids, which is terrifying.
Yeah, that causes an immeasurable amount of damage. long term, and these are the silly cycles that the government make us move in, where then there'll be this period, if they need to reverse the decision, but if not, there'll be this period where nothing works appropriately, the crises get bigger, it'll take them ages to see it. Then they'll say, oh, I know what we need, specialist therapy services. So let's fund, and background will come. We don't need to keep doing that. We need a permanent fund. We need to take politics out of it. This doesn't save money. In fact, I have seen various pieces now on, if we get back to money, on how much money kinship and adoptive families would save the Treasury, if you like, because this is children not in the care system. And it's a lot more than 50 million a year. It's just a false economy every which way you look at it.
Yeah.
And and as you said earlier, Claire, I think one of the things that frustrates me as a clinician is that because of stuff like this, we are forced to have these conversations about the economics of children having families. And it sort of drives me insane because, that's not why I got into this. I didn't get into this work to think about how much money a child costs the state or something. Do you know what I mean? I got into this work because I believe that there's a better way and a better world for these kids, but they need support and help along the way. And it drives me insane that even that we have to sit here and do this podcast and talk about the financial implications. And I know it's so common at the moment, and we're all having to do it in every sector across health and social care. But at the heart of this and at the root of it is these children and young people, and even, and young adults as well, who have had the worst start to life and in my eyes deserve everything to help them try and live a better life than they would have otherwise, and try and, I hate the word normal, but, just try and live a normal life and live the life that they deserve. I was just thinking that I hate that we have to think about the economics of it as well. Ugh.
Yeah, there's sort of various compromising features of it, isn't it? It feels compromising to have to talk about money when, you just want to talk about the children and families and that it matters. And I think as well with these disruptions in therapy, we're all sort of forced in as parents, but for you guys as therapists, to have these breaks in relationship that we know are harmful. Our children, it takes a long time to build those trusting relationships. And you're trying to explain to children, oh, well, the government are doing A, B, and C, but they're thinking, why am I not seeing my therapist? So they not, and we risk the kids thinking, do they not care? Do they not, and all those things. I think that puts you guys in an awful position as well.
It puts you in an awful position. These all the kids that we see coming through our doors, like you said, their difficulties are seated in attachment. They have experienced violence, abuse, neglect, trauma within the interpersonal relationships in their early years. The people who were meant to be caring for them were also the ones who hurt them, neglected them, whatever it was. And so, they have developed their entire sort of neurology, and their whole system tends to be not trusting of grown-ups and not trusting of other people. And that's the point of this specialist work. And that's why it takes so long, because to get over that and move beyond that takes so much time and so much work. And absolutely, it's been one of the frustrations of the ASGSF anyway, is that at the end of the financial year, you have a 3-month break whilst applications are having to be made and panels are having to be held and all this sort of stuff. And in the life of a 6-year-old, a 3-month break is enormous. And it sets the work back far more than 3 months quite often. And you're starting that financial year on the back foot. You're starting that therapy program again on the back foot. Yeah. And so with these cuts, it just means that those relationships are going to be broken even more. And these children and young people are going to be left out on a limb again. And ultimately, they're the ones who are going to suffer because of this.
And I think for anyone listening, the thing that I'd say is, because obviously there's a lot of talk there about it's slow and it takes time. It really, really works, doesn't it? I hugely believe in that. Obviously, there is research that backs that up. But if you look at, my family as an example, and I've heard of so many more, it takes time. You've got to stick with it. But with consistency and reliability and the right mode of therapy, it really works.
Yeah. I guess maybe a nicer place to end. There's not really a nice way to end because this is a crisis. But the things that you've been organising, Claire, and the change that you've been championing, I don't think that's really over-egging it at all, is we've got the march on the 3rd of May, and that's at 1 p.m. And there are details on your website, which is ASGSFprotest.com, I believe. Yes.
Where's it? Where's the... Am I right? Is the meeting point Parliament Square? Is that right?
It's not going to be, and we're finalising.
They're finalising it, which I didn't say.
With powers that be, and we will get the sort of final details out to people ASAP. But it will be a march to Downing Street to deliver the petition, and the exact route and where we start and finish, we'll confirm.
Lovely. Can I bring my dog?
That area.
Yeah.
I can bring my dog. Great. That's the...
Are they vocal? How supportive of the cause will they be?
He's very vocal.
Perfect.
So you can bring your dog. So the march is on the 3rd, and signing the petition, like you said, incredible, 8,000 signatures. It's been out for a week, I think, bit longer.
Yeah. What day is it today? Friday. So
it's Friday, yeah.
Yeah, a week and about half a day.
Incredible. So sharing the petition, signing the petition. Adoption UK have got a fantastic template to email your MPs. I believe we also have a sort of Who's Your MP finder as well. So I'll put all of these details in the kind of show notes. So signing the petition, sharing the petition, attending the march, or just sharing details of the march. We've got loads of stuff on our social media. Claire has loads of stuff on her Facebook page and their Instagram. Anyone who's in the sector seems to be sharing about it, which is just absolutely incredible. And in terms of long term, I mean, that's things you can do immediately as a listener, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a kinship carer, as a foster carer, as anyone who has any kind of relation to this or doesn't and is just, cares. That would be fantastic. But in terms of maybe longer term planning, we're learning about this in the same way that everyone else is learning about this. And we are trying to work on plans and look to the future as much as look to the immediate. But Stephen, can you share any sort of helpful things that people can do or start thinking about?
Absolutely. I was going to say, whether you're with Family Futures or with other services, I think whoever you are, if you're really worried about this, and you probably are, please, if you're with Family Futures, come and talk to us, get in touch with your team here. But, whoever you are, talk to social workers, talk to the therapists who are involved, reach out for help, because this is hugely stressful, and there is a lot happening. So I think, I just really want to encourage everyone to really reach out and, find other parents, find other families, join networks, join communities who are talking about this and supporting each other as well, because I think everyone's going to need support in this. Children,
and
young people, parents, and it affects everyone, absolutely, and it's deeply stressful. So, get in touch with us, get in touch with whoever you're working with. In terms of longer term, we're working with, and we've been doing this for a while, but we're working with families to have robust and accurate EHCPs, so that's educational healthcare plans. Those can be extremely helpful documents in accessing support. And that might be psychotherapy, it might be sensory integration therapy, all sorts of things, but they are complicated documents. They're quite difficult to navigate. They're not standardized around the country, and even within single local authorities, they're often not standardized. And there's often a lot of misunderstanding around them. They're quite difficult to get your head around, but they are legal documents, and they do bring legal requirements with them. But it's about ensuring that they're worded correctly, and that they really reflect the need, and they're very clear about how the needs can be met. And of course, they're also about education. They are education healthcare plans. So, they're often about how, we're always very aware that our therapy that we provide at Family Futures, it impacts home life, it impacts the internal worlds of these children. But of course, really importantly, it supports kids to begin to get back into education and manage education so that they can achieve their potential. And that's really what the AHCP is about, is getting support in, and the right support to help these kids make sure they can fulfill their potential. So we're working hard with families to get EHCPs in a state that really reflect the needs of the children. So I'd recommend, if you don't have one, talk to your school, talk to us.
That process, they're quite a long process, like you said. It's a complicated document. We did a podcast on EHCPs with our parent sort of consultant, Paul Stanley. He's very knowledgeable, and we spoke about how long they take and how complex they are. So start that process.
Yeah, I think you were saying, Claire, but it's a year or two.
It kind of depends. It depends.
Can be.
Authorities will work well with you, and as you say, the therapeutic provision can be key to children accessing education. And if that's the case, then the HCP is the place for you, really. And that therapeutic provision needs to be in Section F, because that's the legally binding part of the HCP, if you like. That's what is within Section F. The local authority have a legal duty to provide, and what's in Section F is based on the child's needs. But EHCPs aren't easy to get, as you've already said, and if your local authority, they all work under budgetary constraints, so it won't necessarily be an easy process. You may have to go to tribunal, but it is definitely a very worthwhile avenue to explore.
Mm-hmm. And outside of that, I think we're since the announcement about the ASGSF, we are working hard alongside individual local authorities on a case-by-case basis. So I think, do get in touch with a social worker or whoever it is that's leading on your support. And we're working hard with social workers to see what we can get done without the ASGSF or with the massively reduced ASGSF.
And this puts, it doesn't just put pressure on providers like ourselves, like therapeutic providers. It puts pressures on the local authorities and on the social workers working in them, on everyone. This isn't again, this affects everyone, but the pressure and the stress for not only the families and the staff and the worry.
Yeah. And I can feel myself getting cross again. But like the change, these changes, the amount of manpower in local authorities that has had to go into, social work teams are now having to rewrite entire application forms and everything for countless families, and the manpower and the hours of work that's having to go into that because of these changes. It's a huge waste of time, energy, money.
Nothing feels joined up, does it?
No.
You take some money away here. People are going to look for it there. It causes chaos. Rachel Reeves says she wants parents back in work, but cutting this certainly doesn't give adoptive and kinship parents and carers equal opportunities to work, because you need the therapy to help your children, to get them in a place where they can be in school and you might be able to access work again. So it impacts, none of it makes sense to me. It's just not joined up thinking.
And it impacts kinship carers as well. And by kinship carers, for anyone who's listening, that is family members who have become the parent or the carer for that child. So that's grandparents, mainly, aunts and uncles. And they are also accessing the Adoption Special Guardianship Support Fund that has been cut, reduced.
So in terms of the long term, we've all got to stick together, I think, and work together and support each other.
Exactly.
And we've got to pull together. That's, parents pulling together, us in the sector pulling together with each other, and speaking up for these children and young people, because they are at the centre of this.
And there is a lot of pulling together, and that is the hugely heartening bit of this piece, if you like. For me, I went from being me on my sofa setting up the petition to I've been joined by two other wonderful adoptive and kinship parents in Ewan and Steph, who are helping with the campaign. And then there's all sorts of therapy teams, yourselves, and who working behind the scenes as well, that are supporting that work. But we're all trying to pull together, and lots of us are, and we're stronger together.
Thank you so much for listening. All the details of how you can support the call for change are in the show notes, and you can find updated information via our website www.familyfutures.co.uk.